Senator Tom Cotton, thank you very much for joining us. Let's talk first about a bill that you filed on Wednesday of this week dealing with immigration, sanctuary cities. Obviously a huge tragedy in the city of San Francisco. But what are you wanting to change, and do you think what you're proposing is going to go far enough to prevent such a thing from happening again?
Roby, I want to make sure that all cities and all states are following federal immigration law. The terrible shooting in San Francisco goes to show that too many cities are not following immigration law, and it puts American citizens at risk. It puts Arkansas citizens at risk because most major American cities are sanctuary cities where the local authorities do not cooperate with the federal immigration authorities. There was an illegal immigrant who had been convicted 7 times and deported 5 times, and he shot a woman in a public space in broad daylight in San Francisco. That wouldn't have happened if the San Francisco law enforcement authorities were allowed by their local politicians to cooperate with the federal immigration authorities. My legislation would simply say that if a city or a state does not cooperate with federal immigration authorities to enforce our immigration laws, then they shouldn't be receiving federal taxpayer dollars in the form of law enforcement grants.
But will taking that federal taxpayer dollars away from them, will that be enough to change that type of cooperation? It's a good stick to have in your hand, but it may not make a difference.
Well, I think many cities faced with the choice between continuing to flout immigration law or losing what is often a very important source for funding for local public safety will make the right choice, and they'll decide to enforce the immigration law and cooperate with federal authorities. In the long term, of course, we have to secure our border and we have to stop the flow of illegal immigrants across our border, because many of those illegal immigrants are coming here as part of drug gangs. They're coming here to commit violent crimes. Many are coming here simply because they want a job, and of course, legal immigrants are coming here to try to build a new life in the American dream. But unfortunately, too many criminals are coming across our borders and committing heinous crimes, as we saw in San Francisco last week.
On Wednesday afternoon, we got a note that you have signed on with the rest of the congressional delegation in support of Governor Hutchinson and Pulaski County Judge Barry Hyde opposing this land transfer in Pulaski County near the Little Rock Port to the Quapaw Tribe Association. Why do you oppose the transfer? What's your fear?
Well, our local officials in Pulaski County and in state government are opposed to this transfer as well. So as the senator representing local authorities in Washington, D.C., I'm trying to be responsive to their interests, and there's real concern in this kind of transfer to the Quapaw Tribe from the federal government that they might use it to avoid state law. They might use it, for instance, to open a casino or other things that would be against the public policy of the state of Arkansas as expressed through our elected representatives.
All right, I'm going to take you across the seas. We're going to talk about Iran. I know you hate talking about things going on in the Middle East there, but you have said earlier this week that the President and the Secretary of State act as if it is cost-free in reference to the extension of nuclear negotiations. Senator Bozeman told me earlier that no deal is better than a bad deal. So if it takes a little bit more time to get a better deal, why is that necessarily bad, that these things are extending a little bit further?
Well, Roby, first off, the Iranians are violating the interim agreement. They're enriching uranium beyond the allowed limits. They're exporting more oil than is allowed. But second, it teaches the Iranians a very bad lesson when we can have these continued extensions, that if they simply stay at the negotiating table and string along the United States and our negotiating partners, they can get more and more concessions. Just 3 months ago, they did this, and they were allowed to keep their enriched uranium in the country as opposed to exporting it. They were allowed to keep their underground fortified military bunker, which they'd said they were going to close. Now they're introducing new terms at the 11th hour, saying they want to lift the arms embargo. They want to lift sanctions on their ballistic missile program. The United States negotiating team should make it clear that there are consequences for such bad faith negotiations. We should walk away from the table, hit the pause button, and restart the negotiations when the Iranians are willing to deal in good faith on our terms, which is the complete dismantlement of their nuclear program.
So if these negotiations, which we still don't know the final details of or where things specifically are at, if it comes out of there that there is an agreement to not allow nuclear weapons to develop, if it comes out that there is a process for open verification of installations, open inspections, will you be supportive of the agreement at that time?
Well, Roby, the administration has already indicated that we won't have any such agreement. 2 years ago when they started down this path, they said the simple goal was to eliminate Iran's nuclear infrastructure. But they've already granted concession after concession going back months. They've recognized Iran's right to enrich uranium. They've recognized Iran's ability to keep their underground fortified bunker. They haven't done anything to address their ballistic missile program. So whatever happens in the next few days and the final terms that are on the table, it's not going to be a good deal. It's going to be a bad deal based on what the administration has already announced. So no, I cannot imagine us supporting any kind of agreement, and I'll use everything in my power to stop it, because a nuclear-armed Iran is the gravest threat we could face. This is a terrorist-sponsoring, anti-American regime that has the blood of thousands of Americans on its hand, and to this day holds American citizens hostage.
All right, let's talk about a likely scenario, one of the tools at your disposal, and that is that Senate or Congress as a whole passes a resolution that disapproves of this agreement. That opportunity will present itself. There are some that say that that won't stop the agreement from going forward, because if this disapproval agreement goes to the president, he vetoes it, it may not be enough votes to override a veto. So what's your next step for undoing a potential agreement that you're going to disagree with?
Well, unfortunately, Roby, unless we were to pass a resolution disapproving of any potential nuclear deal with a veto-proof majority, the president would be able to veto that resolution. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see an open congressional rebellion, to include from congressional Democrats. Again, the president is talking about giving Iran a signing bonus of tens of billions of dollars, money that will go to support terrorists around the Middle East who are killing Americans, who are killing Israelis. That money will be used to support the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which has been on the vanguard of Iran's campaign of terror for 35 years. That it'll do nothing to address the fact that Iran already holds hostage 4 Americans, or that they're continuing to destabilize the Middle East. So I think that many congressional Democrats are very worried about the path the president has taken, especially in these last 2 or 3 weeks, and that you're apt to see an open congressional rebellion and perhaps a veto-proof majority to stop the deal from going forward.
We'll keep our eyes on that as it develops. Let's go a little bit closer to south of our border here. The Cuban embassy looks like it may happen. At least a bill has gotten out of a Senate committee to allow some funding for that. I know you have disagreed with reestablishing some relations with Cuba, but what do you say to the Arkansas rice producers and agricultural community that sees this as a great economic boon? And your position has been in contrast to your fellow Senator, Senator Bozeman there, but what's your rationale, and how do you tell the agriculture community, I can't go forward with this?
Well, Roby, I strongly support our farmers and our ranchers in Arkansas. I'm always looking for opportunities to open up trade, but we have to open up trade consistent with our interests and our values as well. Cuba is still governed by a totalitarian communist regime. They still harbor known American fugitives, cop killers. They still work with outlaw regimes like Venezuela all around the world. And there's been no change in their behavior over the last 6 months since the president announced that he was going to normalize relations. In fact, their political repression has gotten worse. In terms of the economic opportunity, until the Castro regime begins to open up its economy and let people actually keep the bread that they earn with the sweat of their own brow, then there won't be much economic opportunity, because it'll still be a command and control economy. Our embargo is not causing Cuba's poverty. If that was all that it was, then Cuba would be overrun with Japanese trucks or South Korean cell phones, but they're not. They still drive cars from the 1950s, and that's because the Castro brothers control everything that goes on in Cuba. The problem is with the Castro brothers. The problem is not with American policy.
But so you don't think the U.S. policy towards Cuba for the last 50 years is a failure?
So Cuba was increasingly isolated over the last year and a half because their patron, Venezuela, was increasingly impoverished. As the price of oil has fallen in the last year and a half, and Venezuela, which depends almost wholly to fund its operations on their national petroleum company, was having to cut off Cuba, then the Castro brothers were increasingly isolated. And we could have seen a change in the regime. We could have seen at least a liberalization of the regime, because their patron throughout the Cold War, the Soviet Union, was gone. Their patron since then, Venezuela, was gone, and they were literally running out of money and running out of goods. So no, I don't think our policy had been a failure. The terms, the conditions necessary to make it a success were arriving. And President Obama, as he's done in Iran in much greater circumstances, gave our adversary a hand up off the mat when we had driven them down to the mat.
I got about 20 seconds left. Last question for you. Weekend after the coming weekend, Donald Trump will be the speaker at the GOP Reagan-Rockefeller dinner. Will you be at the dinner? And is he the best keynote speaker, just looking at what's been in the headlines lately? Is he the best speaker to represent the Arkansas GOP?
Roby, unfortunately, I'm going to be missing the dinner this year, but I'll send my best regards to all Arkansas Republicans. I'm going to be overseas conducting some meetings in Europe regarding the Iran nuclear program and the potential agreement that we may be facing in the next few days, because I want to make sure that I understand fully the efforts that we're going to be undertaking to inspect and verify any agreement.
All right, we're out of time. I'd like to ask you some follow-ups on that, but hopefully we'll get to that in the coming weeks. Thank you for being with us, Senator.